Hello, everybody, and welcome to the podcast. My name is Isaac Warren. I'm the Assistant Director of Digital Communications at the Illinois Association of School Boards. And with me here today, I have Sandra Kwasa, who is from our Lombard office. Sandra, thank you for coming on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Before we begin, Sandra, could we get a little bit of information about who you are and what you do at IASB?
Okay. Once again, my name is Sandra Kwasa. I have been with the association for about 18 years now, and I'm in board development. I'm a director in the board development department.
Nice. Very cool. So today we're going to be talking about community engagement, specifically why it's important, how that can be carried out by boards, and just go over some of the technicalities of it. Because I think that the boards communicating with their surrounding community is extremely imperative to ensure that there's good relations going back and forth and everyone's on the same page and aware of, like, it's like knowing what the left hand's knowing what the right hand's doing, so to speak. So just to begin, could we define what community engagement even is?
Most certainly. Well, Isaac, first of all, if you were to Google community engagement, a variety of responses would surface. However, this is the IASB definition. Mm-hmm. Bear with me now. Community engagement, also called public engagement or civic engagement, is the process by which school boards actively involve diverse citizens in dialogue, deliberation, and collaborative thinking around common interests for their public schools. Now, that's the textbook definition. I like to simply state it this way. The school board engages in an ongoing two-way conversation with the entire community. This conversation enables the board to hear and understand the community's educational aspirations and desires, but also to inform the community of the district's performance. Two-way conversation that's always ongoing.
Mm-hmm. And when we're talking about surrounding community, we're talking about like the school district and the area that it involves, or that it kind of like encompasses, I guess.
Yeah. And I like to kind of call those segments of the population, and you're targeting the community. It could be anything from the taxpayers, business owners, of course, the students, the staff, the parents. All of those are considered the community. So anyone within that, you're right, geographical area would be considered the community.
Yeah, because any community has a very wide, diverse range of, I guess, target audiences. So
absolutely. And we're going to spend a little time talking about the audiences we believe that you should be targeting in your community and engagement efforts.
Excellent. Well, I think it's also important to understand why community engagement is important. You've kind of hinted at it already, but if you could go into a bit more detail, why is this something that school boards need to be doing?
It's really essential to create trust. And we hear that word all the time, don't we? And support in the community, because the school board needs to have that support of their community. When I say trust, I'm really leaning on pillars of trust. Some of you may be interested or have read the Trust Edge. And in there, they define trust as having clarity, compassion, character, competency, commitment, connection, contribution, and consistency. So why is this so important? This work is important in order to garner that trust in your community. In addition, you also want to garner support amongst all of the people in the community, but also within the board. Trust within the board is important. Trust with the superintendent and staff is equally as important as well.
Yeah. And it's so crucial, especially in a post-COVID world where I think in a previous episode, I talked about this, how the national spotlight on school boards has really intensified.
Absolutely.
And it's like every action is under some intense scrutiny from people that aren't even in the same region. Mm-hmm. And so making sure that the community is trusting and approving of what the board is doing, I think will really help public relations, not just with the board, but, nationally, should there ever be a news article coming out.
And there are many.
Yes, there are. And actually talking about COVID, there has been a new level of engagement by the public with the boards of education and what's been going on. I think that communities have suddenly had a lot more of a vested interest once they saw the things on the news, and maybe were encouraged or discouraged by what they saw and wanted to be more involved in those decisions. So do you have any thoughts about how a board can address their current environment or what's happening in their own community?
You're absolutely right, Isaac. It was interesting. Saturday Night Live did so much in their 2021 skit, if you will, on school boards. I mean, it really showed that common people are now interested in what's going on in the school district. So one of the things that I would suggest for board members in particular is to really think in terms of let's first of all look at your current environment. So back in 2021, during the pandemic, I was actually fortunate enough to work with an Illinois district who explored that very question. And they were just wondering, what should their community efforts look like? And they realized, number one, and created a research paper on this that said they had to shift. Business as usual was no longer an option. And so a few things they considered before they began jumping into little strategies. So often we want to just jump into, okay, let's do this, let's do this. But I'm going to suggest that you as board members always consider first, and this is exactly what they did. They defined the role of the board and the goals of their board in community engagement. So what is the problem that they were trying to solve? Are there specific goals that are important right now in the community? So, for example, I've worked with a board who was trying to pass a referendum, and they immediately said, okay, we need to have community engagement efforts around building the trust and helping the community to understand why it was important to pass the referendum. I worked with another school board who was in a community that was expanding significantly. Mm-hmm. And again, working with the community to understand what was the impact that was going to be on the school district. And also being very intentional about what is your why is the first thing I would say for any board. Define your roles, the role of the board and the goals. Secondly, I would say use various tools to analyze the environment in which they operate. What do I mean? Some of you may be familiar with the SWOT analysis, where you look at the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats of an organization, whether it be a school district or any organization. However, there's also another one called the PESTLE analysis, and that allows you to look at external factors. And so what do I mean here? Here's a brief overview. I love acronyms. PESTLE, P-E-S-T-L-E. So P, look at your political environment. What's going on? Is it liberal? Is it conservative? Is it neutral? Look at your economic situation. Do you have an increased number of free and reduced students, for instance, in your environment? Look at your social environment. Social media is redefining everything in our society today. What about the technology? The technology says that you're going to get information instantaneous. That's affecting your school district. Look at the legal environment. Many of the schools that I'm working with now, they've had to allocate additional funding just for legal. There's lots of the parents are suing school districts. It's all over the place. And then, of course, the environmental, climate control, leads, all of these things that affect, our environment today are also important. So what I would suggest is you can just basically, at a meeting, you can go through this PESTLE analysis and really use this tool to assess your current environment. And it may help you prioritize or reprioritize some of your community engagement efforts after COVID. Mm-hmm. And then thirdly, I know I'm talking a lot, so let me know if I need to slow down. Okay. I think this is something that Isaac alluded to earlier. You really need to define the segments of the population that you are engaging with. So right now, there's several ones. I'm going to just define three of them. Sure. Audiences. You have audiences all the time. These are the people that are consumers of information. They come to your meetings, your regularly scheduled meetings. So we know about audiences. And then, of course, you have your stakeholders, your students, your parents, your taxpayers, your business, faith-based organizations. All of those would be considered your stakeholders, people that are impacted by the decisions that you make. But then there are these publics, and these are individuals and groups that come together on a particular topic or issue, usually through social media. Some of them you like, and some of them help further your agenda. Some of them may oppose what you're doing. And we saw these groups, they constantly come up. And the interesting thing about publics, as we call them now, is they can surface overnight over one particular issue. So the question then is, how are you spending your time today? Who are you engaging with? Are you spending a lot of time dealing with the publics who really are not stakeholders and are really not impacted by the decisions you make? Or are you spending your time with the publics? And so often we react to the publics. Yes. And that's a natural thing to do. So I think just to kind of wrap up this very long explanation is, before you even start thinking about your community engagement tactics or efforts, look at who you are as a board. Make sure you understand the goals that you are aspiring to achieve. Make sure you do an external analysis. Use that puzzle tool to figure out where you currently are, and then figure out who is your audience. Who is the audience? Who are the audiences that you're trying to work with, and who are you spending most of your time with currently, and who should you be spending your time with in the future?
Yeah, that's a really, really good overview of everything that needs to be taken into consideration. And it also really does depend on the medium that you choose with your communication. It's one thing to draft an email to all parents about something going on in your school district, but it's another if you're at a board meeting during open session and someone has a question and they want an answer right then and there. Even then, you have to have this not reactive, but proactive method of thinking when it comes to communication. So it's almost always good to have something in the back pocket of like, I don't know, but I'll find out for you. No, don't just give an answer because they're expecting it. And maybe it's an answer that hasn't been thought through all the way, or it's an answer that hasn't been discussed with the board, because you don't want a board member to be saying an answer that the entire board does not necessarily agree with.
And that's why I think that it's important to really figure out, once you figure out what you're trying to do, how you're going to do is going to be very important. And you, again, very intentional, working with, some of you all have communication directors in your organization that kind of are already communicating all the time. But let me just say this, a lot of this, what I'm saying now, is specific to the board, because your superintendent staff, they are communicating all of the time to members of the community. But right now, the board has a responsibility as well as to communicate and connect with the community. And also working together, we can have a really good process for communication. I
agree. And in keeping with keeping the environment you're communicating with in your mind, or I worded that really odd. When considering the environment that you're communicating to, I think it's also good to kind of just on the topic of mediums, what medium are they most likely to even use or interact with when you're communicating? Is your city like a very small rural town? Are they not on Twitter? Would they prefer, snail mail, traditional communication? Or do you live in a huge metropolitan area that if you try to email or physically mail letters to every single person, that's a lot of stamps, And
I would also say that, I think boards tend to be good at giving information or distributing information. But remember, it's a two-way conversation.
Yes.
So it's also how do you aggressively go out and talk and hear the voices of people in your community that may not be at a meeting, that may not have email, as you suggest, that may not be a Facebook kind of user. So we've got to be aggressive. And what I've seen with some of the districts, they're going into faith-based organizations, for instance, where there's people, they're going into plants where you can actually relate to people that are in the community that are not as apt to come to our traditional or be part of our traditional methods of communication. So it's an aggressive thing that boards now realize that they must do in order to hear the voices of the community.
Yes, absolutely. There's a very much like you got to meet in the middle. You got to meet your members where they're at and meet their community where they're at. This can kind of sound a bit overwhelming. I think if there's a board member who's wanting to implement some communication strategies and this is a lot to kind of take into consideration. What do I do? I think that, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I do think that we have a workshop kind of specifically about this topic, right?
Yes. And I think what happened as a result of working with this Illinois district in 2021, we decided we would like to share this information with other school districts. And IASB then worked with them, and we've created a workshop. And that workshop on community engagement is typically a half-day workshop that guides a board through actually what we just talked about. We look at why the board wants to engage and what are the goals and the problems they're trying to solve. We look at who in terms of your audience, stakeholders, and publics that I just talked about. And then finally, we go to what people really want to get to, the how. And in terms of the tactics, we call them tactics. So we look at the tactics you're currently using, but we also consider other tactics too. We actually share a list of tactics that you want to consider based on some research that we have done and some things that may or may not work. But as Isaac said earlier, it depends on your district, what's going to work for you. And this is not a cookie cutter approach. It's very much board members kind of putting their arms up and saying, okay, what what works for us. And it's a long conversation, but we come out with tactics that make sense given your why and given your who.
Yeah.
And so that is a workshop that is currently available. There's several IASB staff that are able to deliver that into your particular district. And it can be customized into multiple days if you need to. And there's follow-up sessions as well. But we do have something to help you.
So each workshop is catered for the specific board that
Absolutely.
is requesting it.
Yes.
That's awesome.
Yes. But we do have a format, and yet the what people ultimately want to get to is, okay, what are we going to do? How are we going to do this?
Yeah.
And that's what the workshop actually, the deliverable is the how.
Absolutely. That's awesome. You mentioned tactics. What are some common tactics that boards can use to engage with their community? That's just off the top of your head.
Yeah, we have several tactics, but some of them that we're seeing that are working very nicely are adding a non-voting student representative to the Board of Education. That's a way to hear from our youth. I mean, they want, as you know, they have a voice, and we need to figure out constructive ways to hear from them. And also that's something that's very popular. Submitting individual letters to the editor or hot topics. Remember, this can be an individual board member, or it could be the board as a whole. And so there's various tactics. The important thing about the workshop is we all agree upon our approach. Each member adopts a school if multiple schools are in the district, or maybe they adopt a business or an organization, for instance.
Okay.
Assign board members to attend assemblies, fine arts, and athletic events. Most boards are doing that one pretty much. You may want to host an all district or all community webinar or telephone town hall. Join and present at your Chamber of Commerce. I think we're beginning to realize the Rotary clubs, the chambers, they have a lot of influence. We have a lot of boards that are now going to the elderly. If you have a lot of elderly people in your community, you may want to go to a neighboring facility, assisted living facility. These people, they're voters and they're taxpayers in your district too. And of course, holding the coffee and conversation, or some people call it coffee on your corner with stakeholders. Those are some just ideas that come up. And again, what we do in the workshop is we look at what you're currently doing and we kind of vote. And we say, these are some things that we could be doing. We look at the goals and we kind of make a decision as to what's next. And then once those things are determined, we want to institutionalize them. That's probably the wrong word, but we basically put them on a calendar. So because you can't do everything at one time. So which tactics do we need to use at what point? And also that we're not bombarding our community with community engagement.
Yeah. And I feel like that's a hard balance to strike, where you do need to be very aggressive with your communication, but at the same time you don't want to overwhelm.
Yes.
And like, I've gotten 5 emails about, these topics. And so do you have any suggestions for what does that balance look like? Or I guess it is communication with the community. Like, are we sending too much or not enough?
And I think that's why one of the things in the workshop, we really want the superintendent and the communication staff, because again, experts at communication. And to your point about bombarding, if we're going to have a new initiative, we don't want to have another new initiative 1 week down the road. And so we kind of coordinate the calendars within the workshop. It's one of the deliverables we like to see is that you work with them and kind of space out your community engagement efforts. And when you space out who's doing them, it doesn't have to be the same people all the time. And maybe one board member is off, in their community, kind of having the coffee and conversation, 2 or 3 more over here. And so it's strategizing time and resources.
If there is a board member or a board out there who is really interested in taking this workshop, how do they get into contact, or who do they contact and how do they get involved? I
think if you know who your field services director is, I would go directly to them and they can put you in contact with the right person. You are welcome to call me. Is that legit? Can I say that?
Yeah.
Okay. You're welcome to call me Sandra Kwasa, and my email is S as in Sandra, Kwasa, Kwasa @iasb.com.
Yeah. And thank you. And we'll have a link in the description so that you can find your field service director, so you can start this conversation about getting more involved with community engagement.
Yes. We'd love to hear from you. We've done about 5 or 6 of these workshops. All of them look different, different outcomes. And we've got some others in the queue to do. So we're more than glad to talk with you, even if it's just having a conversation about what we do. to and where we can help you with your community engagement efforts.
Sandra, thank you so much for coming on the podcast and discussing this workshop with us. I think it's going to be a great asset and tool for our members.
Thank you, Isaac.